The night before her bonding ceremony, Elara Ashford saw the man she loved holding her sister like she was the only warmth left in the world, and she ran. She didn't scream, she didn't throw things, she didn't demand an explanation or pound on the door or give him the chance to say a single word in his defense. She simply stepped backward out of the doorway, turned, and walked. And then she was running, her bare feet silent against the cold stone corridors of Stormvale Keep, past the garlands of winter jasmine hanging from every pillar, past the ceremonial banners stitched with gold thread, past the great hall where tomorrow's celebration was already arranged, flowers and candles, and all the careful, beautiful architecture of a future she no longer had. Or she ran until the castle was behind her, and the forest was around her, and the only sound in the world was her own broken breathing. She didn't know she was already carrying his children. She didn't know he would spend 4 years dismantling himself, piece by piece, trying to find her. That he would lose weight, lose sleep, and nearly lose the crown in the process. That his closest advisor would sit across from him in candle-lit war rooms and beg him to accept what everyone else had accepted. That she was gone. She didn't know that the man she had watched in that firelit chamber, that cold, flat-eyed stranger who had looked at her like she was an inconvenience, had never been Lucian Blackthorne at all. She didn't know any of this. She only knew what her eyes had shown her, and her eyes had been fed a lie so precise, or so carefully constructed, that it had cost them both everything. Now, in the forgotten mountain village of Brackenridge, Elara Frostborn has built a life from the ruins. She is a healer, a mother, a woman so quietly rooted in this small, cold, beautiful place that the village itself seems to lean toward her, like a plant toward light. Her twins, grey-eyed Ronan and golden Lyra, have never heard their father's name spoken aloud. They have never seen a map of the kingdom that bore their blood. They have never known that their eyes, one pair the colour of a winter sky, and one pair the amber of firelight, are the eyes of a king. But secrets do not sleep forever, and a king who has spent 4 years searching does not stop when he is close. Stormvale Keep had never looked more alive than it did on the eve of Elara Ashford's bonding ceremony. Every corridor blazed with candlelight. Garlands of winter jasmine were threaded through the iron sconces, filling the air with a sweetness that pressed against the back of the throat like something you wanted to hold on to. The great hall had been arranged for tomorrow's celebration with the kind of precise beauty that spoke of months of planning. Long tables draped in silver cloth, centerpieces of pale flowers and dark berries, the king's banner hanging from the raftered ceiling in silk so fine it moved with every breath of air. Elara was not in the great hall. She was wandering the upper corridors in her nightgown, with bare feet against cold stone, too restless for sleep and too honest with herself to pretend otherwise. She told herself it was excitement, the normal kind, out the breathless anticipation of a woman standing at the edge of the life she had always quietly hoped for. But something else moved beneath the excitement, a low, formless unease she couldn't name and couldn't shake, something her wolf felt before her mind could process it, the way animals sense weather before the clouds arrive. She had spent so much of her life being overlooked. Elara was the second daughter of Lord Dorian Ashford, a minor lord whose name carried enough weight to open doors, but not enough warmth to make anyone comfortable behind them. Her older sister Kaya was the one people looked at, beautiful in the way that made rooms go quiet, sharp in the way that made people choose their words carefully, the kind of woman who moved through the world as though it had been arranged specifically for her convenience. Or Kaya had always gotten what she wanted. Kaya had always been the one their father looked at with pride rather than mild expectation. For the first time in 23 years, someone had looked past Kaya and seen Elara instead. She still didn't entirely believe it. 3 months ago, Alpha King Lucian Blackthorn had been introduced to both sisters at a formal gathering of the Northern Houses. He was exactly what the stories said. Tall, composed, with storm-grey eyes that missed nothing, and a presence that bent the air around him. The kind of man who was born, knowing that rooms would wait for him to finish speaking. Kaya had worn deep red, and positioned herself perfectly, and laughed at exactly the right moments and done everything right. Lucian had looked at Elara. Not immediately. Not in the dramatic, candle-lit way that stories described. He had simply looked at her, really looked, the way people rarely did, while she was standing at the edge of the room pretending to be interested in a tapestry, and he had crossed the room and said, "You look like someone who would rather be somewhere else." She had said, "Most places, yes." And he had laughed, not the polished, performative laugh of a man at a gathering, but a real one, surprised out of him, and stayed beside her for the rest of the evening. 3 months of careful, genuine courtship had followed. Letters that were actually written by him, not by a secretary. Walks that wandered longer than propriety required, because neither of them wanted to be the one who said they should probably turn back. Quiet evenings where they talked about things that mattered and discovered, with the specific delight of people who have been lonely without fully admitting it, that the other person understood exactly what they meant. He had never looked at her like she was political. He had looked at her like she was a relief. Her wolf, a pale gold creature she had always kept quiet and contained, more comfortable with gentleness than aggression, had recognized something in him from the beginning. Something steady. Something worth trusting. And now, pacing the cold corridors on the eve of the ceremony that would bind their lives together, she found her feet carrying her in the direction of his chambers without her consciously deciding to go there. She wanted to see him. Just that. To just the reassurance of his face and his voice and the particular quality of attention he gave her that made her feel like the most interesting person in any room. She wanted to confirm, one more time, that this was real, that tomorrow would come, and the ceremony would happen, and the life she had carefully, cautiously, allowed herself to imagine was actually going to begin. She would knock. She would say something embarrassing about not being able to sleep. He would smile in that contained way he had, the one that always managed to reach his eyes, and they would talk for 20 minutes, and she would go back to her chambers, settled and certain. That was the plan. The door to his chambers was not fully closed. Firelight spilled through the gap, warm and golden, painting a slant of light across the stone floor of the corridor. She could hear voices, low, intimate. A woman's soft laugh, pitched in a register she recognized because she had grown up hearing it across dinner tables and drawing rooms for 23 years. The wrongness arrived all at once, a wave breaking over her. Her hand found the door. She didn't knock. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The image carved itself into the deepest part of her memory before her mind had time to process it or her body had time to react. Lucian, standing at the far side of the chamber. Her Lucian, the one who had crossed a room to talk to a girl pretending to be interested in a tapestry, and a woman pressed close against him, her arms around his neck, her face turned toward the door with an expression of slow, perfect triumph. Kaya's eyes met hers across the firelight. She didn't pull away, 'cause she didn't look startled. She didn't have the grace to pretend she hadn't heard the door open. She smiled. "Oh," Kaya said. Her voice was soft with pleasure. "Hello, little sister." Elara couldn't breathe. The world had gone strange. Sounds arriving muffled and distant, the firelight too bright, her own heartbeat too loud. She watched Lucian turn, watched that beloved face shift, watched his expression settle into something flat and carefully composed. He looked at her, not with guilt, not with horror. Not with the desperate scramble of a man caught doing something he knew was wrong. He looked at her with the patient, faintly weary expression of a man explaining something simple to someone who should have known better than to be surprised. "Elara." His voice was steady. "You shouldn't be here." 3 words. That was all it took. Of the voice she had memorized, the one that had said her name in candlelit rooms with warmth and attention, and something that had felt, every time, like being seen. The same voice, wearing a stranger's tone. "Tomorrow," she said. The word came out cracked at the edges. Tomorrow is... Tomorrow proceeds as planned." He stepped away from Kaya, but he didn't move toward Elara. He stayed exactly where he was, a composed, reasonable distance from both of them, as if this were a meeting he had been managing rather than a thing she had walked in on. "Our bonding serves the kingdom. But you need to understand the scope of that arrangement. You will stand beside me at ceremonies. You will bear the heirs the kingdom requires. Beyond that, a pause, deliberate and precise. I have no particular use for you. No particular use for you." But the words landed somewhere below her ribs. Behind him, Kaya lifted a hand to her mouth in a gesture of delicate concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Did you really believe he loved you?" she said, and her voice was almost kind, the way voices are kind when they are delivering something they have enjoyed watching arrive. "Oh, Elara, he was always going to choose someone worth choosing." Elara's wolf howled. Not outwardly. She managed that. She managed to keep it inside, a sound of pure anguish that stayed trapped behind her sternum. But the creature had been so certain of him, had trusted with every instinct it possessed, and now it was tearing at the inside of her chest like something caught. She stepped backward. Then again, her hip struck the doorframe and she turned and she ran. She didn't think about it. Oh, she was just running, through the corridor, down the stairs, through the great hall with its beautiful, mocking arrangements of flowers, through the outer doors, across the frozen courtyard, through the gate that was standing open, because who would expect anyone to run from Stormvale Keep on the night before the king's bonding ceremony? The forest swallowed her. She ran until her lungs burned through the cold air. She ran until the castle lights disappeared behind the tree line. She ran until her legs refused another step, and she went down at the base of a great oak, her back against the bark, and she cried in a way she hadn't cried since her mother died, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere structural, like something load-bearing has given way inside you. Hours passed. The sky changed, black to deep blue, then the faint grey suggestion of dawn at the horizon. She pressed her hand to her sternum, over her wolf, trying to steady her breathing by steadying the creatures. She could not go back. The thought was absolute and physical, like a wall. To walk back into that keep, to stand beside that man, to receive the ceremony and the title and the life that came with no particular use for you. Her body refused it before her mind had finished constructing the idea. But she had no money, no allies outside the pack, no family who would help her. Her mother had been dead for 6 years, and her father, she understood with cold clarity, had always cared more about what she could give him than who she was. A village, she thought. Somewhere small, somewhere remote enough that no one would think to look. She had healing gifts. She had always had them. Her mother's inheritance, her hands that seemed to know before she did what a body needed. She could work. She could survive. She was already surviving this. She could survive anything else. Elara stood on shaking legs and made herself walk away from the tree line in the direction of the mountain road. She didn't look back. She simply walked, one foot in front of the other, until Stormvale Keep was nothing but a shape against the dark that gradually dissolved into the distance behind her. She did not know, could not know, that 6 weeks later she would discover she was carrying his children. She did not know that the man she had watched in that firelit chamber, the one with that flat voice and those patient eyes, had never been Lucian Blackthorne at all. She did not know that the real Lucian would wake, disoriented and hollow-headed, was in the west tower of his own keep, with no memory of the evening's latter hours and a growing dread climbing his spine, and that when he went to find her, her chambers would be empty, and her father would be waiting with a story already prepared, cold and smooth as a stone that had been in a pocket a long time. She only knew what her eyes had shown her, and her eyes had been handed a lie. 4 years is enough time to become someone entirely different. Brackenridge was a mountain village so small and so remote that it appeared on almost none of the kingdom's official maps, which had been, when Elara first arrived here, exhausted and terrified, and 6 weeks pregnant, the entire point. It sat in a valley between 2 peaks, accessible by a single road that became impassable with snow for 3 months of every year, and inhabited by people who minded their business with the particular determination of communities that had learned, over generations, that the less attention they drew from the capital, the better. They had been cautious of her at first, a young woman arriving alone in the early stages of pregnancy, with no family, no explanation, and a look in her eyes like someone who had recently survived something catastrophic. Brackenridge had been polite and watchful. It had taken a winter. By spring, when she had helped Talia Wolfheart deliver a difficult baby at 3 in the morning, with nothing but her own hands, and the knowledge her mother had passed down like a language, the village had decided she was theirs. Now she was woven into the fabric of Brackenridge so completely that she sometimes forgot she had ever been anything else. Her cottage sat at the north end of the main lane, small and stone-built, with a garden that had grown progressively more elaborate over 4 years, as she discovered she had inherited her mother's instinct for growing things. Dried herbs hung in dense bundles from the rafters inside, lavender and feverfew and yarrow and a dozen others, filling the cottage with a layered fragrance that her children had grown up associating with safety. Her work table bore the permanent stains of 4 years of healing work. Her shelves were organized with the precision of someone who had learned, the hard way, that in an emergency you need to find what you need without looking. She was good at her work. She was good at it in the way that certain people are good at the things they were built for, not through discipline alone, but through some combination of skill and instinct and genuine care for the person in front of her that made people trust her before she had done anything to earn it. Children sat still for her when they sat still for no one else. Old men who refused to see healers sent their wives to fetch her instead, as a compromise that preserved their dignity. Pregnant women requested her presence months in advance, unwilling to trust the event to anyone else. She had found a shape for herself in this place, a purpose, a reputation built from nothing, with her own 2 hands, in a village that had no obligation to receive her. She was proud of it in a way she rarely let herself examine, because examining it too closely brought her too close to the grief of everything that had come before. The twins were in the garden when she came out with her morning tea. Ronan was crouching at the far edge of the vegetable beds, very still, watching something in the undergrowth with an intensity that would have been alarming in a grown man, and was simply characteristic in him. He was 4 years old, and he had been that way since birth, watchful, contained, assessing every situation with those storm-grey eyes before he committed to a response. He had been the self-appointed protector of this household since he could walk, which in practical terms meant he took every stranger's approach as a potential threat and every unfamiliar sound in the night as something worth investigating from the top of the stairs with small fists clenched. He had his father's eyes. Elara had long since stopped being ambushed by this. She had learned to absorb it the way you learn to absorb a scar. It was simply part of the landscape of her days, a feature rather than an emergency. But in unguarded moments, when the morning light caught Ronan at a particular angle, she felt it like pressure behind her sternum, the ghost of something she had chosen to bury and could not entirely keep buried. Lyra was a different matter entirely. If Ronan was winter, careful, grey, watchful, Lyra was late afternoon, warm, golden, extravagantly generous with herself. She was running circuits around the garden, with her arms out like she was trying to catch the air, her dark curls flying, apparently singing something to herself in a melody she was inventing as she went. Her amber eyes, but when they found her mother's, lit up with the absolute, uncomplicated joy of a child who had decided, some time ago, that the world was fundamentally trustworthy, and saw no evidence yet to revise this view. She had her father's eyes, too, in colour if not in expression. "Mama, there's a beetle," Ronan reported, without looking up from the undergrowth. "Is he bothering you?" "No, I'm observing." Lyra abandoned her circuits and came to lean against Elara's side, warm and solid and smelling of sleep. "Can beetles come inside?" "Not generally." "What if they ask nicely?" Elara bent and pressed a kiss to the top of her daughter's head. "Then we discuss it." It was a good morning. Most mornings were good, in the way that ordinary mornings are good, quietly, without drama, but in ways you might fail to appreciate if you hadn't spent long enough learning to appreciate them. The trouble arrived mid-afternoon in the form of a travelling merchant named Callan Stormvale, who passed through Brackenridge twice a year and always stopped at her cottage to trade mountain herbs for news from the lowlands. He was a comfortable man, round-faced, easy laughing, the kind of person who made a room feel inhabited, and he sat at her kitchen table and drank her tea and talked about the harvest and the road conditions and the strange early frost in the eastern provinces, and then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned the scouts. "Royal colours," he said, turning his cup in his hands, "moving through the northern villages, asking about a woman travelling alone with 2 small children 4 years back. They say she was a healer. I'll say she had no pack affiliation, paying good coin for solid information." He wasn't looking at her with any particular meaning. He was simply sharing what he knew, the way he always did. News as currency, information as courtesy. He had no reason to connect what he was describing to the woman sitting across the table from him. Elara's hands were very still on her own cup. "Any idea who they're looking for?" she asked. He shrugged. "Some missing lord's daughter, they say. But the coin they're offering doesn't fit a missing lord's daughter. That's king's money." After he left, she stood at the work table for a long time without moving. She had been careful. She had changed her name. She had avoided pack networks, avoided the main roads in her first months of travel, avoided any contact with anyone from her former life, or she had chosen Brackenridge specifically because it didn't appear on maps. She had been so careful for so long that the carefulness had become invisible, just another layer of how she moved through the world. But the scouts were getting closer. She could feel it the way her wolf felt approaching weather, not as a thought but as a physical reality, something in the back of her throat, something in the heightened alertness of the creature that lived beneath her skin. That evening, after dinner, she read Lyra 3 stories and watched Ronan sit upright long past when he should have been asleep, listening to the sounds outside the window, with his head slightly tilted and his eyes focused on something she couldn't see. "Mama," Lyra said sleepily, from beneath her quilt, "why don't we have a papa?" It was not the first time she had asked this. It would not be the last. Elara sat on the edge of the bed and brushed her daughter's curls back from her face, and said what she always said. Some families are built one way, and some are built another. Ours is complete exactly as it is. Ronan says everyone has a papa somewhere, Lyra said. Ronan is very thorough, Ilara agreed. From the other bed, Ronan said, without opening his eyes. I said probably everyone. She waited until both of them were asleep before she went to stand at the window. The village lane was dark and quiet, the mountain above it a blacker shape against a black sky. The road from the pass, a pale suggestion in the dark. The scouts were getting closer. She had two choices. She could pack what mattered most and take the children and find another Brackenridge, somewhere farther, somewhere harder to reach. She had done it once. She knew how. Or she could stay. Her hands found the windowsill. She pressed her palms flat against the wood and thought about Talia Wolfhart's daughter, who was 2 years old and had been born in this cottage with Ilara's hands as the first hands to hold her. She thought about old Brennan, who had stopped being able to manage his fields alone and who she brought soup to every third evening. She thought about the child who had nearly died of fever last winter and hadn't, because she had been there. She had built something real here. She had earned every stone of it. For the first time in 4 years, she did not reach immediately for the option that involved running. If the road to Brackenridge climbed through 3 separate stretches of mountain pass before the valley opened below, like a secret kept by the peaks on either side, and Lucian Blackthorne had not spoken more than 20 words in the past 2 hours of riding. Caspian Ironvale, his closest adviser and the closest thing he had to a friend, rode beside him and said nothing either. Caspian had learned, over 4 years of this search, when Lucian was processing and when he was drowning and which one required conversation. This was processing. The set of his jaw, the steadiness of his hands on the reins, the way his grey eyes were fixed on the road ahead rather than the middle distance. This was a man managing himself carefully, because the alternative was falling apart, and he had not allowed himself to fall apart since the 3rd month after she disappeared, when Caspian had found him in the war room at 2 in the morning, with nothing on the table in front of him but a map covered in crossed-out locations. That night, Caspian had sat down across from him and said, "You need to sleep." Lucian had said, "She's out there." "I know she's out there." "Then I need to find her." "You cannot find her if you destroy yourself first." Caspian had pushed a cup of water across the table, a gesture that was somehow both practical and kind. "Sleep 4 hours. Then we look at the map together." That was how it had been. 47 leads over 4 years. Some credible, some desperate, some so thin they were barely worth the ride. Every one of them had ended in a village or a town with no Ilara in it, and each one had cost him something, a small piece of the hope he was rationing carefully, because he understood that the supply was not infinite. This one was different. He had felt it from the moment the scout's report reached him, a specificity to the details that the false leads never had. A healer named Ilara Frostborn, 2 children, approximately 4 years old, arrived in Brackenridge around the time of the ceremony. No pack affiliation, no family claimed. The name she had chosen made his chest tighten in a way he didn't examine too closely. Frostborn. She had renamed herself after the cold. "What do you say to her?" Caspian asked, finally. Lucian was quiet for a moment. Below them, the village was visible in the valley. Smoke from chimneys, the small movements of ordinary life. A collection of stone buildings so modest that from up here it looked like something a child had arranged. "The truth," he said. "Everything. From the beginning. She may not want to hear it. That's her right." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "I'm not asking her to forgive me. I'm not asking her to come back. I need her to know what actually happened that night, because she has been living 4 years inside a lie, and she deserves to know that the man she saw was not me. Caspian studied him. And if knowing isn't enough, then I leave. His voice was level. I promised myself that if I found her safe and she told me to go, I would go. I meant it. You would go? Caspian repeated, with the careful tone of someone who isn't sure they believe what they're hearing. I would go, Lucian confirmed. But I would go knowing she was alive, knowing the children were safe. That matters more than what I want. Caspian said nothing to this. He looked at the valley below, and then at the man beside him, and something in his expression went quiet and thoughtful. They rode in silence the rest of the way down. Lucian had thought about what he would feel when he saw her, had imagined it so many times over 4 years that he thought he had catalogued every possible version of the moment. Relief, grief, the specific ache of wanting to reach for someone you have no right to reach for. He thought he was prepared. He was not prepared for what he actually felt when the village lane materialized below him, and he saw 2 small figures in a garden, one crouching in concentrated stillness and one running in joyful circles, and then a woman emerging from the cottage door, the pausing at the sound of hooves on the road, going very still. She had changed. 4 years had sharpened her, taken the soft uncertainty that had always lived around her edges, and replaced it with something that held its shape. She was leaner, steadier, wearing the kind of composure that comes not from distance, but from having been tested thoroughly and found sufficient. She was more herself than she had been the night of the ceremony, which struck him as both right and devastating. Their eyes met across the distance. He watched her recognize him. She did not flinch. She did not run. She looked at him with an expression that was not surprise. She had been braced for this, he understood suddenly, or had been bracing since the merchant told her about the scouts, and her hands found each other in front of her, in a gesture that was quiet and controlled, and spoke of someone who was very carefully managing a significant internal event. His wolf, which had been grey and quiet and barely present for 4 years, lurched toward the surface with a force that almost unseated him. He dismounted and let the distance close between them to 20 feet. Ilara. He hadn't meant it to come out that way. Rough at the edges, stripped of composure, a single word carrying 4 years of everything he hadn't been allowed to say. He had planned something measured, something that gave her space. Instead, her name left him like something that had been held under pressure too long. She absorbed it without blinking. You need to leave. I've been searching for you. Then you've wasted 4 years. Her voice was flat and certain. I have nothing to say to you. I want you off my property and out of this village. Please. The word felt foreign in his mouth, not because he was too proud for it, but because he was not sure he had said it that way to anyone since his mother died, with that particular rawness, without any authority behind it. Give me an hour. 1 conversation. If you still want me gone afterward, I will go and I will not return. Her jaw tightened. He could see her calculating, not whether to believe him, but whether she could afford to refuse. Whether the threat that was already circling, the one he suspected she knew about, meant she needed to hear him out. Not here, she said finally, with a glance at the children. Or not in front of them. Ronan had stopped observing the undergrowth. He was standing at the garden gate with small fists at his sides, and an expression on his 4-year-old face that was so precisely, heartbreakingly familiar that Lucian went still. Storm-grey eyes. His eyes. Assessing the situation with the focused wariness of someone who had appointed himself the last line of defense. Leave my mother alone, Ronan said. Not loudly. not with a wobble in his voice, with simple, serious authority, the kind that expects to be taken seriously because it has never had reason to expect otherwise. Lucian crouched down, slowly, putting himself below the boy's eye line. "I'm not here to harm her," he said. "I promise you that." Ronan's expression did not shift. Mama says promises are just the beginning of things. What actions are what matter. Something moved through Lucian's chest. Grief, wonder, the specific ache of encountering a child who has your own nature in a face you have never seen before. "Your mother is right," he said quietly. "I intend to prove that." Ronan looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Then he looked at his mother, then back at Lucian. He stepped aside. Not warmly, but he stepped aside. Elara gave him 1 week. She said it the way she said difficult things, directly, without softening it, looking at him with eyes that were giving away nothing. 1 week. You stay in the village. Not in this house. You do not approach the children without my permission. You do not invoke your title or your authority within Brackenridge. If you cannot agree to those terms, or do you leave now? He agreed to all of them without a single negotiation, which was somehow more unsettling than if he had pushed back. He made camp at the village's northern edge with his soldiers, who were quiet and professional, and seemed to understand that their role here was presence, not prominence. He asked Caspian to coordinate with the village council rather than simply asserting authority. He spent the first day doing nothing that could be interpreted as a demand. Elara watched all of this from a cautious distance and told herself it was strategic, that he was simply smart enough to understand what would and wouldn't work here, that the consideration was calculated. She was mostly successful at believing this. The problem was the children. Specifically, the problem was Lyra. Lyra had a gift that Elara had identified early and regarded with equal parts admiration and exhaustion. She could detect sadness in people the way other children detected sweets, with unfailing accuracy and an immediate desire to address the situation. She had found Lucian sitting on the stone wall at the village's edge on the second afternoon, doing nothing in particular, and had walked up to him with the absolute confidence of someone who has never been made to feel that her attention is unwelcome. Elara, watching from the cottage doorway, had considered intervening and had found herself rooted to the spot instead. She watched Lyra stop a few feet from him and study his face with the open, assessing gaze of a child who has not yet learned to make her curiosity discreet. She watched him notice her, watched the careful composure shift into something softer, something that didn't know what to do with itself. She watched her daughter say something that made him go very still. Later, when Lyra came back inside, Elara asked what she had said to him. "I told him he had sad eyes," Lyra reported, with the satisfaction of someone who has done a useful thing. "He said he was lost. I said that was okay because you always find your way back, eventually." "Did he say anything else?" Lyra considered. "He said he hoped that was true." She picked up her doll and moved on to the next pressing matter of her afternoon. "He has Ronan's eyes, Mama." "Did you notice?" "Go play," Elara said, and she waited until Lyra had gone outside before she pressed her back against the work table and breathed. Ronan was harder, or he watched Lucian with the sustained, unblinking attention of a child who has appointed himself a security system, tracking every movement with those grey eyes that were so familiar and so utterly his own. On the third day, he approached Lucian in the afternoon with his arms crossed and said, without preamble, "Are you going to make my mother cry?" Lucian looked at him steadily. "I made her cry once," he said. "I have regretted it every day since. I am here to try to fix that." Ronan was quiet for a moment. "You can't always fix things you break." "No," Lucian agreed, "but you can try. And if the thing can't be fixed, you can spend the rest of your life making sure it doesn't break any further. Another silence. Ronan's expression did not warm, exactly, but something in it shifted. Some small, almost imperceptible recalibration. "Oh, that's a very long time," he said. "Yes," Lucian said. "It is." The conversation Elara had given him happened on the third evening. She found him at the stone wall again, as the sun went behind the peaks, and she sat at the other end of it, enough distance between them that it was not proximity, just shared space, and she looked at her hands. "Tell me what you think happened," she said. He told her about the evening, the invitation from her father. "Come share a drink, welcome to the family. Let us bury the stiffness between us for your daughter's sake." The wine that had tasted faintly wrong, the growing heaviness in his limbs, the way his thoughts had become like reaching through water. The gap, hours of nothing, no memory, no continuity. Waking in the West Tower with no understanding of how he had gotten there. "Boar, I went to find you," he said. "I was disoriented and frightened, and I wanted to see you. Your chambers were empty. Your father was waiting in the corridor outside them." "What did he say?" "He said you had confessed to plotting against the crown, that you had fled before you could face consequences." A pause. "He had witnesses, 3 of them, all of whom I later learned were paid." She absorbed this without speaking. "I didn't believe him," Lucian said. "Not for a single moment. The woman he was describing was not the woman I knew. But you were gone, and I had no proof of anything, and every official channel told me the same story. So you searched." "I searched." Something in his voice went flat and simple, not for sympathy, just as a statement of what had been. "For 4 years, I sent men to every corner of this kingdom. I personally followed 17 leads. I kept expecting to find you somewhere safe and discover you had made a life and needed nothing from me. I was prepared for that." She looked at him sideways. "Were you?" He met her gaze. "No," he said after a moment. "But I was prepared to accept it, if it was what I found." She looked away. The mountain peaks were going dark against the sky, the first stars appearing above them. "If the man I saw that night wasn't you," she said quietly, "then what did I see? I heard his voice. I saw his face. I believe someone was hired to impersonate me. A shifter, probably. Someone with the gift of precise mimicry." He kept his voice even. "I have been trying to prove it for 4 years. I have names. I have payment records from your father's accounts that I cannot yet explain." My father. Not a question, not a stone dropping into still water. She said nothing else. But when she stood to go inside, she paused for a moment at the end of the wall. "Come to the cottage tomorrow," she said, without looking at him. "For dinner. The children should get used to seeing you before anything is decided." She walked inside. Lucian sat on the stone wall until the stars were properly out, not trusting himself to move until the thing happening in his chest had steadied enough to be manageable. The crack in the wall was small. He could not push on it. He understood this. He could only wait and prove, and let it widen at the pace she chose. He had waited 4 years. He could wait. She arrived on the 5th day, in the grey morning before the village had properly woken up, and what stopped Elara from closing the door in her face was not mercy, but it was the shaking. Kaya Ashford did not shake. In 23 years of life alongside her older sister, Elara had never seen her hands tremble, not at their mother's funeral, not at the most difficult social performances their father had ever put them through, not in the worst moments of their worst arguments. Kaya had always been a still surface over whatever was happening underneath. Her hands were shaking now. She looked like someone who had been traveling hard and sleeping poorly. Her dark hair, which had never been anything less than perfect in all of Ilara's memory, hung loose and slightly tangled around her face. She was wearing a traveling cloak that had seen better conditions. The composure she had always worn like an outer garment was gone, not replaced by emotion exactly, but by something raw, and something that looked like a person stripped down to their essential structure. "I need to speak with you," she said. "Both of you, please. Give me one reason to let you through this door." Kaya reached into her cloak and produced a book, leather-bound, worn at the edges, closed with a simple clasp. She held it out. "Because Father is coming with hired soldiers, and I am the only one who knows exactly how many and from where. And if you don't hear me out in the next 10 minutes, the information becomes less useful with every hour that passes." Ilara took the book. She recognized the handwriting before she had read 3 lines. Her father's script, precise, controlled, the letters of a man who wrote with economy because he considered brevity a form of authority. She flipped to a page in the middle and read, "Amira Nightbane to receive final payment upon confirmation of separation. Phase 1 complete. The girl fled as expected. The king's evening unaccounted for. He will remember nothing. Case decay. Positioned as replacement. Succession to fall to Ashford blood within the year. The page was dated 4 years and 2 weeks ago." She turned to another entry. Payment records for Lord Caspian's guard captain. 3 months' salary. Silence regarding the West Tower. Another. Nightbane's gifts confirmed sufficient. Mimicry holds under direct observation. Subject's emotional state will guarantee she does not linger long enough to question. She closed the book. Lucian, who had come in answer to her message and was standing behind her, said nothing. She could feel the stillness in him. Not calm, but the specific controlled quality of a man who is managing something enormous. "You knew," Ilara said to her sister, "that night. You knew the man I was looking at wasn't him." Kaya held her gaze. Yes. The word was the simplest thing she had said. It landed like a stone dropped into water. 4 years pressed against the inside of Ilara's chest. The specific loneliness of the first year, the terror of giving birth without anyone who loved her in the room, the long, careful work of building a life from nothing, the 10,000 ordinary moments of raising 2 children alone, the nights she had lain awake and thought about what she had seen and tried to reconcile the man she had loved with the man in that firelit room, and found she could not, and had concluded that her instincts were simply broken. All of it. 4 years of all of it. Or traced back to one woman holding a lie open for her to walk into. Why? Not fury. Just the question. Empty and real. Kaya's hands went still on her lap. "Because I wanted what you had," she said. "Because I had spent my entire life being the one Father pointed to, and I had decided, at some point, that I deserved everything I wanted, and what I wanted was him." A pause. "And because Father told me it wouldn't cause real harm, that you would be positioned elsewhere, that no one would be hurt." Her voice went flat with self-knowledge. "I believed him because I wanted to. I stopped believing him within a year. By then you were gone, and I had no way to find you, and I told myself it was too late." "It was never too late," Ilara said. "You chose not to look." Kaya didn't argue. "Yes," she said again, with the same simple directness. "So I did." Silence settled over the kitchen. Outside somewhere, Lyra was singing to herself in the garden. Ronan was probably watching the road. "Father," Ilara said finally, "how many men?" "Hired soldiers, approximately 200. The majority are loyal to payment, not cause. Their commander, A man named Soren Darkmoor works exclusively from the rear, protected by his best fighters. Father will be with him." Kaya's voice shifted into something clipped and informational. She was more comfortable here, with intelligence than with feeling. "He believes he can take the children quietly. He underestimates what you've become." "When?" "He was 3 days behind me when I left." Elara looked at Lucian. He was looking back at her, and whatever was on his face was not triumph at being proved right. It was simpler than that, and harder. It was grief. "Tell me how we stop him," she said. "Together," he said. She turned back to her sister. "You will stay here, under guard. You will give us everything you know, every detail, every name, every supply line. You will not be alone with my children at any point." Her voice was not heated. It was the voice she used when the instruction needed to be understood clearly and completely. "If you betray us, I will deal with that myself." "Do you understand what I mean by that?" Kaya understood. "Yes." "Then stay." It was not forgiveness. It wasn't close to forgiveness. But the door stayed open. 3 days. That was how long they had, and they used every hour of it. Lucian's soldiers transformed Brackenridge's perimeter into something defensible, not impenetrable. They were too few for that, but structured around Kaya's intelligence in a way that maximized what they had. Choke points on the single road into the valley, supply caches hidden in the caves above the village, clear evacuation routes for anyone who couldn't fight, the elderly, the families with young children, everyone who needed to be somewhere else before the force arrived. Kaya's information was precise and invaluable. She knew Soren Darkmoor's tactical preferences. He was aggressive early, over-reliant on the weight of numbers, and he maintained his command position far enough from the action that disrupting the front line would take time to register with him. She knew the location of their supply wagons. She knew which of the hired soldiers had been with Dorian longest, and which had signed on most recently. And she knew that recent signings, as in her father's experience, scattered when the certainty of payment became uncertain. Elara worked alongside all of it, with the focused efficiency she brought to difficult cases, not because she was unafraid, but because fear and action were not mutually exclusive, and she had learned, in 4 years of being the only person responsible for her household, to move through the first in order to reach the second. On the morning of the 3rd day, she knelt in front of her children before they were taken to the mill. Ronan stood very straight. He had the particular stillness of a child managing something larger than usual. "Will you fight?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She did not soften it. He was the kind of person who needed truth more than comfort, and she respected that in him, even when it made things harder. He squared his shoulders, a gesture so adult on a 4-year-old frame that it nearly undid her composure entirely. "I'll take care of Lyra," he said, "until you come back. I know you will." "Mama, I'm scared," Lyra said, from against her side. "I know, love." Elara pressed her face into her daughter's curls. "Being scared is not the same as being in danger. You will be safe. Ronan will be with you. I will come for you when it's over." She held them both for a long time. The force arrived at first light, over the northern crest, 200 shapes resolving out of the grey dawn, moving fast, confident in their numbers. The battle hit the perimeter immediately. Lucian's soldiers were outnumbered, but positioned, and the first wave broke against the choke points and scattered into a less organized engagement than Soren Darkmoor had planned for. Elara fought at the perimeter alongside them. 4 years of lifting, building, gardening, and the physical dailiness of raising small children had kept her stronger than her former self, and her knowledge of anatomy, originally built for healing, translated into a precision that she had never trained specifically, but discovered under pressure. She knew where joints could be compromised. She knew where pressure produced pain without permanent injury. She moved through the engagement with a focus that came from not having the option to fail. It was Lyra's voice that stopped her. From the direction of the mill, faint, high, alarmed, a sound she would have identified in any amount of noise. She was running before the thought had finished forming. The cellar door was torn from its hinges. Inside, the organized stillness of a man who has waited a long time for his particular moment. Dorian Ashford stood in the center of the root cellar, as if he had arranged this encounter himself, dressed carefully, unhurried, with Ronan's collar in his fist and the studied composure of someone who has already planned every contingency. Ilara. He said her name with the particular warmth of a man who is most affectionate when he believes he has already won. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. Come in. Please. Close the door. Ronan's hands were around his grandfather's wrist, pulling with everything he had. His face was white and furious, and fully focused on the problem rather than the fear, and the sight of him, 4 years old and absolutely refusing to stop fighting, hit her like a hand pressed flat against her chest. Let him go. Let's not be dramatic about this. Dorian's expression remained pleasant. You have something I need. 2 children with royal blood, which is worth considerably more to me than anything this kingdom has given me for 30 years of service. Walk forward. Surrender willingly, and I will let the boy breathe more comfortably. She heard movement in the shadows behind him, a second figure, still and waiting. She braced for the second threat, and found instead that it was Kaya, positioned close to the wall, eyes on their father's back, holding something in her right hand. You wanted to control the succession, Ilara said, keeping her voice level and her father's attention forward. Or you wanted an heir under your hand, a king who didn't exist without your permission. The kingdom requires competent management. Kaya moved. The blade was small, and she drove it into Dorian's shoulder with more precision than force, enough to make him release Ronan, enough to make him turn, not enough to do lasting damage. Ronan dropped and was running for his mother before Dorian had finished shouting, and Ilara shifted. She had kept her wolf contained for 4 years, contained the way you contain water in a vessel that has been sealed too tight for too long, with increasing pressure and decreasing ease. The shift, when it happened, was agonizing the way things that have been waiting too long are agonizing. An enormous, total release, bones remapping themselves, muscles following, or the pale gold creature surging forward from 4 years of confinement. She landed on 4 legs between her children and her father. Dorian stumbled backward against the cellar wall, his carefully maintained composure fractured for the first time. He had built an entire architecture of control around the assumption that she was someone he could manage, that the girl he had positioned and manipulated was the whole of what she was. He had forgotten, or perhaps never known, that she had a wolf, that the wolf had been patient, not absent, that 4 years of protecting 2 small lives in difficult circumstances had made her something he had never accounted for. You can't, he started. She moved forward 1 step. He stopped. She was larger than her human form by a significant measure, and she was standing between him and the exit, and the weight of her attention was not the polite, manageable attention of the second daughter. It was the full, focused presence of a wolf who has run out of reasons to hold back. She could end this. The knowledge was very clear and very present, not as temptation exactly, but as a fact. She was aware of it the way she was aware of her own heartbeat. She could end it, and the threat to her children would be finished, conclusively, and no amount of legal maneuvering or political positioning would bring it back. Ronan was watching her. His grey eyes were wide and fixed on her, on his mother, on the wolf she had become, and his expression was not frightened of her. He was simply watching, waiting. The same careful attention he brought to everything. She thought about what she wanted those grey eyes to have seen in 30 years when he remembered this moment. She shifted back. She stood over her father in human form, her hands at her sides, and she looked at him with the quiet certainty of someone who has made a decision they will not revisit. "You will spend the rest of your life in a cell," she said, "stripped of your title and your lands and your access to anything that could extend your reach. You will watch everything you tried to take go to the people you tried to destroy. And when you die, you will die knowing that I had the choice in front of me, and I chose something better than what you would have done." She stepped back. Lucian was there. He had come through the cellar door behind her. She hadn't heard him arrive, but he was there, and his soldiers were behind him. Mosen Dorian Ashford was being taken into custody with the brisk efficiency of men who had been waiting for exactly this outcome. Kaya was on the floor where she had landed after Dorian shoved her. Elara went to her. She checked the injury with her healer's hands, a bruised shoulder, a cut on her palm from the grip on the blade, nothing that wouldn't heal, and said nothing for a long moment. "You saved him," Elara said finally. "I owed him that." Kaya's voice was barely above a whisper. "I owed you all that. When you're healed enough to travel, go wherever you need to go." Elara sat back on her heels. "Make something better of yourself than what he made us both into. Don't come back until you are ready to be known for something other than this." She paused. "I'm not telling you never. I'm telling you not yet." Kaya closed her eyes. Elara stood. Ronan was at her knee, and Lyra had come in from wherever she had been sheltering and was pressed against her side, and she gathered both of them in her arms and held on. They were shaking, all three of them. She let it happen, didn't try to manage it or move past it. Just let the shaking be what it was. The battle was over. The village was standing. And Elara understood, with the same clarity she brought to a diagnosis, quiet, certain, non-negotiable, that she would never run from anything again. 3 days later, Brackenridge was quiet. Not the held-breath quiet of before, the watchful kind, the waiting kind, but the genuine quiet of a place returning to its own rhythms. Dorian Ashford and his remaining hired soldiers had been taken toward the capital under Lucian's authority. Kaya had healed enough to travel and had left quietly, without ceremony, in the early morning before the village fully woke, which Elara thought was probably right. Goodbyes would not have served either of them. Caspian Iron Veil had arrived from the capital with formal documentation, and more importantly, with news that Mira Nightbane had been located and had agreed to provide full testimony about the events of the bonding eve in exchange for reduced charges. The conspiracy was being unwound, publicly and carefully. Lord Dorian's accounts were being examined. The council was being informed. The legal and political architecture of what had been done 4 years ago was being dismantled, piece by piece, with the thoroughness of someone who had been planning this dismantling for a long time and was executing it without deviation. Lucian handled all of it efficiently in the daytime hours. In the evenings, he was simply present. He fixed old Brennan's gate, which had been hanging crookedly for months before the battle made it worse. He sat with the twins in the late afternoons, not attempting to crowd them, not performing any particular version of himself, simply being in the same space in a way that invited them to decide what they wanted from it. He brought Elara news from the capital when she asked for it. He did not push. He did not invoke the week's deadline or the resolution of the battle as leverage for anything. The morning after Caspian arrived, Ronan came to find him in the garden. He stood in front of Lucian with his arms at his sides. No cross-armed wariness. aught which was notable, and after a brief silence said, "Will you show me how to hold a blade properly? Maddox from the village showed me, but I don't think he was doing it right." Lucian blinked. Then he recovered. "Yes," he said. "Absolutely." They spent an hour on it. The grip, the angle, the shoulder alignment, the patience required to do the small thing correctly before the large thing. Ronan was focused and quiet and absorbed correction without resistance, which Lucian later told Elara was, in his experience, the mark of someone who would eventually be genuinely skilled at whatever they decided to learn. Afterward, Ronan set the blade down and stood for a moment in the way he stood when he was finishing a consideration. "You're not completely terrible," he said. "Thank you," Lucian said gravely. "Yet that means a great deal. You can eat with us tonight if you want." He ate with them that night, and the night after. Elara watched it happen the way you watch a wound begin to close, with relief that is complicated by the knowledge of how long you were in pain. The twins were not performing acceptance for her benefit. Ronan was not warming to Lucian because she seemed to want him to. He was not that kind of child. He was warming because something in his own careful assessment had shifted, and that shift was honest, and the knowledge that it was honest made it harder to protect herself from what it meant. On the 7th night, she went to the healing room late after the children were asleep. She hadn't asked him to come. She was simply there, working, and he was somehow also there, sitting on the narrow cot with his elbows on his knees, watching her sort dried herbs with the focused attention of someone who finds the task genuinely interesting, which she doubted he did. He was watching her. She knew it and said nothing about it. "You don't have to come back," he said after a while. She kept her hands moving. "I know. Whatever happens with the legal proceedings, whatever title the children eventually hold, you have rights here, in this village, under my protection, that don't require you to ever set foot in Stormvale Keep. I want you to know that." She set down the herb she was holding. "Why?" "Because I need you to understand that I'm not here as a king expecting a return. I'm here as a man who needs you to know what actually happened and who has spent 4 years understanding. Or very clearly, that I don't get to ask for anything else." The room was quiet. Outside, wind moved through the valley. A soft sound, something that in 4 years had become one of the sounds she associated with home. "I wanted to hate you," she said. "Not an accusation. Just a fact. When I left, hating you was the only thing that made the leaving make sense. If you were cold and dishonest, and I had been completely wrong about you, then running was right. Then I was protecting myself. And if you weren't wrong about me, then I spent 4 years mourning something that didn't have to be lost." She turned to face him. "I tried to hate you. I tried for 2 full years. Ronan was born with your eyes, and I tried to be angry about it, and I couldn't. Lyra learned to laugh the way you laugh, and I tried to be angry about that too." He stood up, slowly, and crossed the room in the careful way he moved around her now, giving her time, giving her room, treating the space between them as something that required her permission. "I have been half of myself for 4 years, he said. "Not for the kingdom. Not for the crown. For you. You were the person I wanted to think about out loud. The person I wanted to tell things to. I had no interest in any version of my life that didn't include you in it. And I spent 4 years trying to do the work anyway, and I was—" He stopped. Started again. "I was very tired," he said simply. She felt the thing she had been managing, the careful containment of 4 years, begin to give way. Not with a crash, with the quiet, irreversible settling of something that has been held under pressure finally being allowed to rest. "If I tell you something, she said, "and you respond badly. I will never forgive you for it. Tell me." "I love you," she said. "I have loved you since before I left, and I loved you while I was gone, and I love you now. I tried to stop, and I am not able to stop, and I am furious about it. And I am also—" She exhaled. "I am also very relieved." He lifted his hand and touched her face the way he had 4 years ago. Palm warm, thumb light against her cheekbone. The same gesture, the same specific gentleness, carrying 4 years of everything that had happened in between. "I love you," he said. "I have never not loved you. Not for one day of the past 4 years." The mate bond, when it settled between them, did not arrive with thunder. It arrived the way warmth arrives in a room when someone finally lights the fire. Quietly, thoroughly, from the edges inward, until the cold that had been the room's whole character was simply gone. A golden thread, bone deep and permanent, stretching between two people who had found each other on the other side of an enormous lie. She felt his love as clearly as her own heartbeat, his relief, his grief for the years they could not reclaim, and beneath all of it, deeper than everything else, stronger than the grief, more certain than the relief, a joy so unguarded she felt it with her whole chest, the joy of a person who has been patient for so long that a rival has become almost unbelievable. "I'm still angry," she said against his shoulder. "I know. About the years, not about what was taken. So am I. That doesn't go away just because I know." His arms around her were steady and present and asking for nothing she wasn't willing to give. "It doesn't have to go away. I'm not asking you to let it go. I'm asking you to let me stay while you carry it." She closed her eyes. The decision did not come that night. She did not make it in the warmth of the bond, or the relief of being held, or the ease of a moment that felt, finally, like something that had been right for a long time. She made it 5 days later. She was standing on the cottage porch at dusk, the children asleep inside, Lucian sitting beside her with the particular quality of stillness that was one of the things she had loved about him first. The ability to be present without filling space he hadn't been given permission to fill. The valley below was going golden. The mountain road was empty. "I want to go to Stormvale," she said. He turned to look at her. "Not to stay. Not yet." She was clear-eyed about this. It was not a surrender. It was a step. "I want to take the children and show them where they come from. I want them to understand what they carry. And then I want to decide, from a place where I actually have a choice, what comes next." "Then we go when you're ready," he said. "Slowly. And you decide at every step." "I will," she said. "I'm not the girl who ran anymore." "No." There was something in his voice, quiet and certain, admiration running beneath the words like a current beneath still water. "You're not." She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers with the steady, the non-demanding grip of someone who has been given something they will not take for granted. "Together," she said. "Together," he agreed. In the morning, Ronan came downstairs to find Lucian making oatmeal with Lyra as his enthusiastic and entirely unreliable assistant, and stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment with his arms at his sides, and his grey eyes moving from his father to his sister to his mother in the doorway behind him. "This is going to be terrible," he said. "It's going to be an adventure," Lucian corrected, turning from the stove with something that might charitably be called oatmeal on the spoon. "Oh, adventures don't smell like burned oatmeal. You haven't tasted it yet." "I have a nose." Lyra dissolved into laughter, and the spoon dripped on the stone floor, and Ilara leaned against the doorframe with her hand over her mouth, and felt it, the ordinary, specific, unrepeatable rightness of this exact moment, settle into her the way the bond had settled. Quietly, thoroughly, from the edges inward. They ate the oatmeal. All four of them, at the small kitchen table that had fit 2 children and 1 careful, solitary woman for 4 years, slightly cramped now, everyone's elbows touching. Ronan ate his with the resigned thoroughness of someone completing an unpleasant task. Lyra ate hers with the cheerful enthusiasm she brought to everything. Lucian ate his and said nothing, or which was either politeness or an inability to claim it was actually good. Ilara ate hers and watched her family, this strange, improbable, fiercely assembled family, and felt the thing she had spent 4 years carefully not feeling open completely in her chest. Not the love. The love had never closed. The hope. She had run from Stormvale Keep in the dark with nothing but a shattered heart and a borrowed road, and she had built a life from what she had, from skill and stubbornness and the specific tenacity of a woman who had decided that the life she wanted was worth constructing by hand if it could not be given. She had raised 2 children who were remarkable. She had made herself necessary to a village that had no obligation to receive her. She had become someone she would not trade for the person she had been at 23, standing on the eve of a ceremony and believing that someone else's choice was the source of her worth. She was worth more than she had known then. He had found her at the end of 4 years of searching, and found more than he had left. She hoped, in her most private and unguarded moments, that he understood that. She thought, watching him navigate an argument with Ronan about whether the oatmeal constituted food in any meaningful sense, that he probably did. She found him with her sister, and she vanished. For 4 years she carried the weight of something that was never real, a lie precise enough to take everything. But she also carried what no lie could touch, 2 children with their father's eyes, and a love so stubborn it had outlasted every attempt to extinguish it. He found her in a mountain village at the edge of his maps, or hollow from searching, and he found something he had not quite dared to hope for, a woman who had been through the worst of what the world could arrange against her, and had come out the other side not diminished but deepened. Some lies are constructed to be permanent. Some bonds are stronger than the lies built to break them, and some stories, the ones worth telling, do not end with the running. They begin with the staying.